The president spoke as the Commerce Department gathered technology executives and public policymakers together to address the widening gap in computer and internet access. 47% of whites now own computers compared to 19% of African Americans, according to a Commerce Department report. For more on why that matters, we went to California's Silicon Valley, where the power players believe new technology and new ways to do business have eradicated racial and class prejudices. Have they? And is this where society is heading? Follow Highway 101 past the corporate campuses here, and it certainly looks like the future. New kinds of workspaces, new ways of working in them. New things accomplished that could only be imagined just a few years ago. Such as animated dinosaurs that looked absolutely real in the movie Jurassic Park. They were computer-generated, of course, on machines made by a company called Silicon Graphics.
So I'm not disagreeing with your objective.
Kenneth Coleman, on the right, is Senior Vice President at Silicon Graphics. Coleman's undergraduate degree in engineering and his master's degree in business administration provide an educational pedigree that is prized in Silicon Valley.
Then you can see how
his 12 years here and 10 earlier years at Hewlett-Packard, with time in between at a startup, are the perfect Valley resume.
Okay. I think there are three issues that we have, and they're not about strategy.
All that has propelled him into senior management, in charge of global sales and marketing, in charge of 4,000 people, $2.7 billion in annual revenue, and all the relationships Silicon Graphics has with customers.
I know I can recreate growth for this company. I've been very successful by all measures. And I'm not complaining, I'm quite happy. On the other hand, you asked me the question, Ken, do you believe if you were a white American, given your abilities, your experience, your education, your talents, would you be a CEO today? The answer is absolutely yes. I'd be a CEO.
A chief executive officer, the boss. Could it be Silicon Valley overlooked him because of his race? Would you say that there's any kind of overt discrimination here?
Oh, I think there is little to no overt discrimination here. That would be highly unusual in the Valley here.
What happens then?
Well, it's subtle, it's subtle. The way things work is networking, Most key jobs are filled by networking, people you know. Most startups are funded through networks, and therefore, unless you take overt actions to ensure that in fact you have an integrated workplace, it tends not to happen.
Kenneth Coleman began this day with exactly the kind of networking experience he means.
You gotta kiss a lot of frogs.
Having breakfast with an executive who wanted Coleman's advice as he left Silicon Graphics to start his own company.
He called me and says, hey, I'd like to talk to you and get your advice, pick your brains, ask you have any recommendations. That's a very typical thing to happen. In fact, in this restaurant, there are probably 12 other conversations very similar to this. And if you go all over Silicon Valley, there are probably hundreds of conversations like this, because that's the way it works.
Coleman calls this help affirmative action, looking out for someone. It's the affirmative action he would like Silicon Valley companies to take for young African Americans. But he thinks that will require the success of more African American executives.
In terms of the revenue and versus the bookings?
When I exist, sensitivities change.
How do you mean?
That is, the organization just becomes more sensitive to people who are different, okay? And that minorities are more open to coming and interviewing here.
I'm not going to do diversity for diversity's sake where I can't get someone who's qualified for a given job. Showtime.
T.J. Rogers, president and CEO of Cypress Semiconductor, says racism does not exist in the Valley. And if African Americans are underrepresented here, it's not because they are shut out.
If you've got the right stuff, you can play. And if you can play well, you can join the Millionaires Club. That's exactly what Silicon Valley's about. There are 1.7 million people online, going to 13.7 on investing. I make integrated circuits. And electrons obey the laws of nature, and they don't care if the engineer pushing them is male or female, black or white or brown.
True, says Kenneth Coleman, but short-sighted.
And I believe it's to the company's best interest to have a diverse workforce. I think you create a better company and you produce better products and therefore better profits.
Atlanta for years called itself the city that was too busy to hate. This place seems to be rushing forward so fast you could say this is a community too busy to worry about diversity.
In fact, that's a great way to put it. I think the big issue on diversity in our valley here is it's not on the agenda. People are so busy. People are doing so much, creating companies, building companies, hiring people, changing jobs, that they aren't stopping to think about some of the issues.
Sometimes it seems that the Valley's relaxed working style, volleyball at noon, gets more attention. But the San Francisco Chronicle examined diversity there, reviewing employment records for 33 of Silicon Valley's leading companies. On average, the Chronicle reported, they are about 4% African American and 7% Hispanic American. African Americans make up 8% of the Valley's population, Hispanic Americans 14%. But must company payrolls match their community demographics to the percentage point?
It should be a goal or quota to have a certain racial diversity in your board. Wrong. Immoral. Bad.
There's something bigger at issue here than today's hiring practices, though, and that's tomorrow's society, says Manuel Pastor, professor of Latin American and Latino studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz.
What we're seeing in the Silicon Valley is essentially, in my view, the future of the rest of the United States economy. This new economy could be one of rapid growth, rapid opportunity, a tremendous amount of flexibility, and a lot of creativity. Or this new economy could be one of widening inequalities by income, increasing geographic and occupational division by race, and an economy which has hope for some and hopelessness for many.
Two societies, one largely white and Asian and plugged in, the other black and Hispanic and unplugged. A new Commerce Department report called Falling Through the Net, as in Internet, suggests that race rather than income divides computer owners from non-owners, and that the gap is widening despite declining computer prices. And why should a decentralized medium such as the Internet not impart knowledge and power equally across races? Because, says Anthony Walton of Bowdoin College, African Americans are failing to gain access to it. A lack of interest, not a lack of talent. And looking at history, Walton says no wonder. The black community, he says, had one negative encounter after another with the technological innovations of whites.
Every technological change that had occurred had worked to the distinct disadvantage of Africans or African Americans.
Examples: the guns slave traders used to capture Africans, the manacles and chains used to subdue them, the Portuguese caravel, the first sailing ship that could sail against the wind, loaded with heavy cargo, including human cargo. In the New World, the cotton gin.
And suddenly, cotton farming was economically viable. And this led to the importation of many more Africans onto this continent.
The importation and enslavement of millions, thanks to one invention. But Walton says it's time for young African Americans to embrace the computer and the Internet.
The creators of the Gates Millennium Scholars.
And some in high technology get this. Microsoft's chairman Bill Gates.
If you look at our industry and you say who's getting these great jobs, if you look at the pipeline, go back into the universities or even before that and say who's setting themselves up so that they can be part of this and contribute to this, it's not fully representative.
In that speech, Gates went on to announce he and his wife Melinda would give $1 billion, $1 billion, for minority scholarships.
Congratulations on your award.
And Kenneth Coleman, who was honored for his work with young people one night after he and his wife Caritha invited CNN to their home, gives the same advice to each young person he meets.
Cheers.
All kinds of things.
The Internet is here. There are enormous opportunities in technology. Get on board now, because talent will prevail in this economy.
When Kenneth Coleman moved to this valley in 1969, it was covered with plum orchards. Now, its signature crop is millionaires, and few people are more aware of the change than the Colemans, who've been there to witness it all.
This is our celebrity row.
This is our celebrity row here, yeah.
By one count, there are now 250,000 millionaires here, more than the entire population of Rochester, New York, or Salt Lake City, Utah. All millionaires. And more than 60 new Silicon Valley millionaires are minted every day.
The question is how many are going to win, how many are going to lose, who's going to win, who's going to lose. But I think
Kenneth Coleman is working to make a share of that available to any young talent who wants it.